Hello everyone and welcome! In today's video, I'm going to be completing the RC 125th scale 1995 Toyota Supra build. This car turned out looking awesome and I'm really excited to finally be able to share the second part of the series with all of you. As you might recall, I first introduced this project a few weeks back when I unboxed the model kit, assembled the 3D printed FPU-C1 chassis, and got this awesome looking AMT body mounted to it. I also did some test driving with this new, bigger, faster RF130 motor installed, and the car was a blast to drive. With everything working great, all that's left to do now is to make this thing look as good as it drives, with a little paint and some additional parts. Now if you haven't yet seen the previous video and would like to catch up, I'll be sure to include the link to it below in the description. The first thing I wanted to do to the body was remove a number of imperfections and smooth out some of the transitions between the body panels. The roof panel, for example, wasn't a very close fit, so I sanded down a few sections of it so that it would be almost seamless with the rest of the car, rather than having the outer sections sitting higher than the rest of the roof. Just like on a full-size car, you want to try to get all the body panels lined up perfectly and have the gap between them nice and even all the way around. It's basically the same thing that I'm trying to do here with this model. In addition to sanding away some of the imperfections, I also deepened and widened some of the panel gaps. Although this body looks great overall, I do wish some of the details on the body, such as the weather stripping around the windows, was a little larger and more crisp and well defined, if that makes sense. This would have made airbrushing some of the details a little later on easier. I finished up by sanding the entire body with some 600 grit paper to help with the primer and paint adhesion. Next, I began gathering all of the parts that I'll be using for this build. Obviously, not every part that's included with this model kit will be used, but for anything that will be used, such as the light lenses, the spoiler, and the side view mirrors, I cut them off the parts tree and did any necessary sanding or trimming to get all those parts to fit. As is common, the model kit includes both front and rear windows, but nothing for the doors, so I'll need to make those myself. All I did was just make a basic stencil, then cut them out from a clear plastic sheet. Since this car won't have any kind of interior, I'll be blacking out the windows with paint. With the body sanded and all the other parts needed to complete the car fitting well, I rinsed the body and then applied the primer. I used white primer since I wanted to paint the car white. However, I never did quite completely cover that green plastic underneath, even after the paint, which you'll see later on. I guess in hindsight, going with a darker color would have been a good idea, but I really wish they would have just molded the body in white so that any color could be used without really having to lay it on thick. I know they're tried and true techniques for painting white on top of a dark color, and I'm probably not using the right technique or the right paint, but do we really need this body molded in sinus infection green? Alright, mini rant over. Really, it's not a big deal. It still ended up looking pretty cool in the end, as you'll see. I continued by sanding the body to help with paint adhesion and to remove any final imperfections. After that, I painted the panel lines. As was suggested previously by some of you viewers, I wanted to try adding them under the paint rather than on top to hopefully make them a little more subtle and realistic looking. This would have looked great if I only needed a few coats of paint. They looked awesome after the first few coats, but I kept having to paint more coats and more coats to hide that green plastic underneath, to the point where the panel lines kind of got covered up and don't really look as good and consistent since the panel gaps kind of got filled with the white paint. I'll definitely be trying this again on a future project. If I was in this exact situation again, I'd either apply more coats of primer first, or apply a couple coats of paint, then add the panel lines and then the final coats of paint. You may have noticed that I painted the cowl black as well. I did this since the hood is glued in place, and I wanted to get as deep as possible between the hood and the cowl with a paintbrush, and I figured that I'd do that now before worrying about getting paint on the outside of the body later. I will need to paint the cowl once again, but I don't need to worry about getting into those harder to reach sections. After painting the body and setting it aside to dry, I moved on to the wheels. I'll link the wheels I'm using below in the description. You can also find the STL files on Patreon. I really like the design and I think they'll look good on the Supra. It's actually the same design I have already, except I'll be painting these chrome. Before I can paint them though, I did need to do a little sanding to remove any leftover remnants of the support structure used while they were being printed. I also did a little sanding on the spoiler and side view mirrors and made sure that each piece fits together well. There's a little spot on one of the side view mirrors that needed a little filler, which I applied and then sanded smooth. Unfortunately, at some point between sanding and painting, the filler must have fallen out since that dent magically came back, and I only noticed it after painting it, so this ended up being for nothing, but oh well. I continued by gluing each part of the spoiler together and washing all the parts before finally painting them. While those parts were drying, I once again turned my attention back to the body. The paint turned out nice, despite some of the green being visible through it. I sanded away a few imperfections and dust that landed in the paint before adding all of the black details, including the cowl, weather stripping, hood vents, and headlights. I once again set the body aside and worked on painting these headlight pieces and the transparent parts. For the headlight lenses, I simply used a marker to make the edge black. To improve the appearance of the taillight pieces, I backed them with some silver paint. Later, I'll be adding black to the outer edge just like I did with the headlight lenses. Transparent orange was used for the turn signal lenses. The instructions said to paint these headlight pieces white, so I did, though I think they'd look pretty cool if you left them chrome as well. Back to the body, I applied all of the water slide decals that I'll be using. This kit includes a large amount of decals to put on the hood and the sides of the car, but I decided to keep it pretty simple and only included the light decals and license plate. With the decals added and the details painted, I applied the clear coat over top. After giving the clear time to dry, I began the final assembly, starting with gluing all of the windows inside the body. With the windows in, I moved on to adding all of those little light pieces. They are kind of tricky to get in, but I think they look pretty cool. To put the headlight lenses and the other clear parts on, I made sure to use glue that would dry clear. The final few parts to add were the spoiler and side view mirrors. Next, I glued the brake rotors to each wheel and mounted them to the chassis. I love how these wheels turned out, and I think they match perfectly with the Supra body. At this stage, the car was looking sick, but there were still a few final things I wanted to do before I considered the car complete. I wanted to add a large intercooler to the front to sort of fill the void behind the front bumper, and I also wanted to add a tailpipe to the back. Before I sat down at the computer to design and 3D print some custom parts, I went searching through my parts bin and scored a couple of usable items. The first is a 3D printed radiator from a previous project that, after cutting a little shorter, will fit great and give me the look that I want. And the second item was a little plastic piece that protects the pins on the end of a fluorescent light tube. It's a bit random, but it ended up looking great as a tailpipe. I've got parts and junk drawers full of stuff like this, and it's kind of funny how random trash can be used for model building more often than you might think. Although the tailpipe might be a tad bit small, at least in my opinion, it's the same diameter as the tailpipe included with the kit, and believe it or not, it looks way better. And with those parts in place, the car was now finally complete. The finished result turned out looking awesome. From the paint color to the wheels and the black accents, I'm very happy with the final result, and it really makes me want to build another Supra. I know Tamiya makes a 4th gen Supra model as well that I've heard a lot of good things about, so I might have to get one of them for a future build and see how the two compare. Of course, no finale to a build is complete without some driving. Although I've already driven the car quite a bit, it's even more cool seeing it fly around the track fully built. Obviously, there hasn't been any change in performance since the last video. Like I said when I drove it before, it's fast and very fun to drive. I did end up catching the rear wheel on a joint between the two mats, which broke the wheel once again. At that time, I simply replaced it with one of the bronze wheels that I had on the car before and kept going. However, this pushed me to design a stronger version of this wheel with thicker spokes. While not quite as scale looking, hopefully it will prove to be stronger. I've made both versions of the wheel available to be purchased or STLs to be downloaded, so you can choose which version that you want to use. Driving the car on smooth, flat surfaces will prevent this, so I decided to go outside and do some speed runs on the bumpy, rock-filled pavement. An all-around really cool project. If you'd like to do a similar build yourself, you'll find links to the chassis used and STL files below in the description. I'm planning on trying out some different tires on this car and maybe even changing up the wheel design, but we'll see. Of course, I'll be sure to include all of that in an upcoming video. Big thanks to everyone for watching. I hope you all enjoyed watching these videos as much as I enjoyed making them. There's lots more content on the way, so be sure to stay tuned. But that's going to be all for today. Thanks again, everyone, and I will see you next time.